Well, welcome back, everyone. I'm Arathi Prabhakar. I'm one of the co-chairs here at PCAST. And for those of us who are here in person, the members just came back from a tour of Michigan Central, which was terrific. We saw a train station that had been abandoned for 30 years and has been lovingly restored, and I got to tell you, it gives you real hope for the future, and that's a great way to start off the afternoon. We've had some excellent discussions about transportation. We've got a third panel that I think promises to bring more of the same. So let me introduce our three speakers, and then we'll turn to each of them to kick off with some remarks. Our speakers are, first, Edwin Olson, who is the CEO and the co-founder of May Mobility. Welcome. We're happy to have you here. Paul Krajewski is here with us from General Motors. He is the Director of Connected Vehicle Experience Research at GM, so we'll be hearing about that. And then finally, we have Luke Polson, who is here in the city of Detroit working for Mayor Dugan as the Senior Executive for Development and Economic Transformation. And thank you for sharing your wonderful city with us. We're so very, very pleased to be here in Detroit. So let's start, Edwin, with you. And I'll give each of you about a 1-minute warning. We'd love to get your thoughts to kick off the discussion.
Terrific. Thank you, everybody. Again, I'm Ed Olson. I'm the founder, CEO of May. Academic by background, so we can geek out later. To start off with a little bit about what May is, because many of you may not be familiar with the company. May Mobility develops autonomous driving technology and works with cities to deploy it to help solve transit problems. So to the rider, what we build looks and feels a lot like a Lyft or an Uber or Waymo, but our go-to-market strategy is about partnering with cities to deploy this technology in a way that is beneficial to the city, avoids adding to congestion, helps with accessibility and equity. Now, there's a couple reasons we're really passionate about AVs, and that's because there's a lot of problems that I think AVs can help solve. 25 million Americans have a disability of some sort that interferes with their ability to get transportation. A stunning one is 3 out of 4 transit agencies in the United States have had to reduce service because they can't get enough drivers to provide that service. And people driving their own cars downtown is not an answer either. It costs on average about $30,000 per parking spot to provision a personally owned vehicle parking spot. And of course, there's the safety aspect. We know the fatalities, 42,000 fatalities a year is just not acceptable. So really our belief is that every American should be able to get around. They should be able to get to the grocery store, get to medical appointments. That's really, transportation is an essential ingredient to a high quality of life. To zoom in on some of those problems, one of the earlier speakers mentioned that Detroit is about 1/3 parking by land use. This is actually a map of the parking in Detroit. It really is that much. And you think about the lost opportunity that goes into this. All of those little colored patches could be green space or affordable housing or cool restaurants. In fact, parking is the most inefficient use of land space that humanity has yet conceived. It costs a huge amount to build and it generates no revenue for the city. And this is a huge problem. It dilutes the city. And this led famously to the municipal bankruptcy in Detroit in 2013, where really the size of the infrastructure, the amount of roads, the amount of parking, all of that had to be maintained to support this car-dependent lifestyle cycle was outstripping the revenues that the city could bring in. And it led to financial collapse for the city. So one of the North Stars for me in May Mobility is this quote from Gustavo Petro, who is the mayor of Bogota. He said that a developed country isn't one where the poor have cars, it's one where the rich use public transit. And I love that vision, but to make that the reality, we have to elevate what public transit is so that people who have the option of using cars will adopt public transit as well. So let's talk a little bit about the technical challenges facing autonomous vehicles. And the good news is that there's been a huge amount of progress in even just the last 12 to 18 months. For maybe a decade preceding that, I think the AV industry had a reputation of one that was making lots of promises that were not getting fulfilled, dates getting pushed back. But now you can go to any number of cities across the United States and Japan as well and get in an AV and experience what it's like. And they drive really, really well. May Mobility is in 8 cities and we'll be in 16 cities in just a few months. And of course, Waymo has some really big and impressive deployments in Phoenix and San Francisco. A lot of what's made this possible is, you can guess it, machine learning, AI methods. And a lot of progress has been made here. I think the basic cartoon sketch, which many of you will be familiar with, is you go out, you collect a whole bunch of data, maybe you use generative AI methods to augment that data with additional data, and then you go off to your data center and you train up your model. And you can put that model on the car and you hope for the best. And what we've shown is that many companies that have been able to burn down enough of these edge cases that are left over to operate safely in cities. But one of the challenges here, the key technical challenges, is really about cost. It's incredibly expensive to collect millions and millions or even billions of miles of training data in order to feed these machine learning models in the hopes that the car will always be in an environment that looks like it's training data. It's a really hard way to go. So one of the technologies that we're really excited about is using online reinforcement learning, where the vehicle is generating new training data as it drives that's relevant to the situation that the vehicle is actually in. And so this essentially guarantees that the vehicle is never outside of its training data. And that's one of the ways that we've been able to really reduce the cost of building and deploying this from city to city. So turning page to key social adoption challenges. I think this is one concern that we hear over and over again. Will people get in an autonomous car? And I have good news. The reality is we've been operating for 7 years and we've never had anyone refuse to get into our vehicle. The key is, are you solving a real problem? If you've got a rider who is standing on the side of the curb waiting for a bus and it's cold and they're getting wet, and you come up with an autonomous car or really anything and it's warm and it's comfortable and it's going to take them directly to their destination, guess what? They get in. And so this has really been the key to our strategy of building social acceptance, to find pain points and to solve them. And one of the key ways we do that is working with city partners who understand where there are communities that need the most support. So we lean really hard on city partners to identify where to deploy. One of the places we've deployed, which is a fun case study, is Grand Rapids, Minnesota. So this is an Iron Range community, about 14,000 people. It's not a very affluent community. Owning a car is a severe financial hardship for many people in Grand Rapids. So we were able to deploy a fleet of vehicles here that are wheelchair accessible. And in fact, 10% of our rides are making advantage of our wheelchair accessible vehicles. Customer acceptance is really high, 4.9 out of 5 stars, just like a Lyft or Uber rating. And 91% of our riders are repeat riders. We also have a new deployment here in Detroit, which we're really excited about. It's actually just down the road a little bit, which is we're following the same roadmap to drive success forward. So what do we need to drive the industry forward? Well, like any new technology, autonomous vehicles start off more expensive and get less expensive over time. But it's really important that cities have funding mechanisms that allow them to start experimenting with autonomous vehicles. So the federal government has been very helpful. We've been able to use a number of ATTAIN grants and DOT grants to help cities experiment with this technology to understand where they add a lot of value and maybe some places where they're not adding value. And so that's one of the things that we're looking forward to moving forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that introduction, Edwin. And let's move now to Paul. Thank you.
All right. So thank you very much. Honored to have the opportunity and really excited to kind of share a vision of transportation from the GM perspective. So you may have seen we have a vision that incorporates 3 things: 0 crashes, 0 congestion, and 0 emissions. The emissions 0 gets talked about all the time. Right? You hear about charging, you hear about electrification, critical materials. So I'm not going to talk about that one today. I'm going to talk about the other 2. And I want to also bring up the point that both of these are aspirational goals. We're not going to have 0 crashes tomorrow. We're not going to have 0 congestion tomorrow. But there's a lot of technologies out there that will enable us to move along that path. So I wanted to start with a few examples of some technologies recently on our vehicles that came from R&D that are now enabling us to provide less congestion and more safe experiences. And just a couple to point out, the one up at the top, we've made a huge investment in display technology. And we'll talk about that a bit more in the future, but how can I display information for our customers in a new way? And this new display on the Lyric is just awesome, a curved LCD display, it's fantastic. But then also our rear view mirror, that is a camera. Imagine driving on a road trip, you got all your friends in the back seat, full up with luggage, and you cannot see what's behind you. Well, if I have this camera, I could now keep you safer, I could see what's around you. And then the last one I want to point out is our Super Cruise technology. That's just amazing. I had the chance a couple weeks ago to take a road trip with my dad to Florida, and we were towing a boat with Super Cruise, and it performed amazingly well. And you talk about people being nervous about autonomous. My dad was a little nervous at first, and all of a sudden it was like, wow, this is really impressive. It can drive, handle all the situations that you can see. So what does this look like going forward? Well, one of the things that is important for all of these technologies going forward is how we could virtualize and simulate the whole experience for our customers. So we have a facility about 25 minutes north of here at our tech center in Warren, where we could put somebody in a vehicle, have a total immersive scenario around them, and then begin to test and explore different technologies that the customer would experience and understand how they could experience them, how they're feeling. And one of the things we're very excited about is leveraging biosensing and biotechnology to actually quantify what this experience is. As opposed to just asking somebody, how was it? And them saying, it was okay, I could measure their experience. So this is all in the laboratory state, but it's giving us great insights into how to better develop these scenarios for our customer. And another one that we're very excited about as part of this work is looking at EEG or brainwave technology. Imagine someone gets in this autonomous vehicle in the future and they're very limited. My mom, for example, was a quadriplegic before she passed away, could not interact with the vehicle. What if you could have that person change the radio or just do a few things that empowers them more than they could otherwise just getting in that vehicle? I think there's a lot of really interesting opportunities there. From the safety perspective, we are leading an industry consortium on developing a biofidelic model for the human body. Think of a crash test dummy that's virtual and incorporates all of our organs and human performance. So now you could do things like the movie that's playing above me to simulate a crash event. In this case, this is a crash event with no seatbelt. So it's a great example to show the kids what this looks like, wear your seatbelts. But we could then translate that event to what happened to someone's brain, what the local pressure is. Could I then use that for two things? One, developing better systems to keep them safe during an event, but then also giving feedback to a first responder on what has happened. The other beautiful thing about a virtual model is that I could now morph it, and I could go from small children all the way up to large adults, or even people in a wheelchair or in other scenarios, and be able to simulate that environment and come up with better restraint systems or airbags or other things to keep those people safe. So we're super excited about that. I mentioned display technology. We're really looking at how to take this to the next level. Augmented reality, virtual reality. Can I do things like paint the road with where I'm going? Kind of think Mario Kart, but not as congested as you might think there. But how could I provide that information so the person doesn't have to take their eyes off the road and can keep it right there and know where exactly they're driving to? Very excited about some of the breakthroughs there. From a congestion perspective, we've partnered with the University of Michigan and the local DOTs to optimize traffic lights. So we just published a paper earlier this year on work that we did in the city of Birmingham, one of the suburbs of Detroit. We were able to optimize traffic lights, leveraging our GM vehicle data, and demonstrate that we could save people 10 to 20% of their time on certain routes. That's huge. I mean, people will pay to be able to save time, and that's the whole point of zero congestion, is to save people time. And so we've gotten a lot of interest. We actually have a contract now with Oakland County here in Michigan to do more optimization of traffic lights, and we're seeing more and more interest from other DOTs as well. One of the last ones I want to present is this whole idea of vehicle to vehicle or vehicle to infrastructure communication. There's been a lot of discussion through a variety of CHIPS Act, Science Act, other acts to try and figure out how do we do this better as a country and get ready for this whole vehicle to infrastructure discussion. Here's an example shown behind me. We've all been in this situation driving down a road. It's a two-lane highway. something slow ahead of you and you want to pass, but you might not be able to see what's there. And those are awful crashes if you have a head-on collision. So if I'm now in a scenario where the vehicle ahead of me or the infrastructure can talk to my vehicle and say, it's clear, you're good to go, now I could be much more safer. And this requires a lot of investment from OEMs, but from governments, and great partnership to make this whole infrastructure happen. And that kind of leads me into the how do we do this, right? We can't do this by ourselves. It has to be with partnerships, private-public partnerships, partnerships with universities. I show a number of universities that we're working with on my team. We're partnered with the US CAR, the Department of Transportation, Department of Energy. We actually have a project with NASA on my team as well. And we are also partnered with GM Ventures. So we have a ventures arm that invests in startups. If I could find the right startup with a technology that's relevant to us, we could then take that and figure out how to implement that into our vehicles as well. So I hope I excited you with a little glimpse into the future, and look forward to the discussion after this. And thanks again for the invite.
Thank you so much, Paul. Turn it over to Luke now.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Detroit. I hope you've enjoyed your visit and enjoyed your time in our beautiful city. I hope they're feeding you well, and you're eating all the great food we have to offer here. So I am neither an engineer nor a technologist. If you'll give me your grace, would like to start with some remarks looking at this through more of an economic development lens. And it's tempting to think of Detroit as merely a car city. And yet, innovation is a necessary part of our core strategy for enhancing the competitiveness of that core sector, diversifying our economy and creating a more resilient economic base for us to create new jobs, and not just new jobs, but net new jobs, and multiply the growth along the local economy, and generate revenues that the city can reinvest in services to the benefit of citizens. Now, that seems like it should be taken for granted, but this is a necessary discourse here in Detroit because innovation-based economic development is good for Detroit, and it is good for Detroiters. Our task is to maximize that economic impact and maximize the opportunities for the economic inclusion that we can build along the way. You know, Detroiters like to say that we invented the American middle class. It's a little bit of an exaggeration, but nevertheless, reflective of the work that we did in the industrial economy to find success here and build a city that worked for everyone. The work ahead of us is to do the same in the innovation economy. We can do it again, and we really have to do it again. Innovation-based job growth, in our view, is really the only way and the best way to raise median income in Detroit and Michigan. Entrepreneurship is part of that strategy. It builds the wealth that we need to reinvest in a robust ecosystem, and tech entrepreneurship, I think, above all else, is the sort of great economic equalizer that we can bring to bear to have equity in the innovation economy. So, you know, we view this work as being more urgent than ever, given that our traditional largest employers are facing very significant domestic and international competition for the future of the auto industry. And our task, I think, is to build an innovation system that helps them win. That, of course, means excellence in battery chemistry and electronics, hydrogen fuel cell technology, electric motors, power electronics, and perhaps above all else, software. You know, cars stopped being machines a long time ago, and they really became computers on wheels. And all of that, all those requirements really are, that shift is the opportunity that we need to really write our economic future. Among the opportunities to seize, in our view, is really in the advanced manufacturing sector. Now, thinking about the capabilities of advanced manufacturing and the solutions that it can bring to our climate crisis, our housing crisis, it can speed up and scale up the deployment of new technologies. It can decarbonize those operations, production, supply chains, and really, rather than be the threat to Detroit's manufacturing workforce, it can really be the technology capability that can secure the future of Detroit's manufacturing workforce. So this is Detroit's big opportunity. Detroit has the technical and workforce capabilities to lead in advanced manufacturing, and we also have the built-in customer base to support the development of those technologies. Our existing human capital includes the nation's leading commercial and industrial design talent pool. We have the nation's highest concentration of engineers per capita, and we have 240,000 assembly and production workers. This is one of the largest and densest in the country. New advanced manufacturing ventures require access to workforce, and we have that. And we have the means to create the skilled workforce that is required to be successful as well. You know, one legacy of our existing manufacturing base is really the best in nation state and local workforce development and upskilling platform, I think, in the country. That is a comparative advantage that situates us perfectly to seize new opportunities and really use advanced manufacturing to build our way to a future that leverages the efficiencies and really the carbon savings in those processes that we desperately need in order to deliver value and build our way out of these crises. So really looking forward to the Q&A. I meant to keep my comments brief, so I'll hand it back to Rati and we'll get started.
That was great. Thank you, all three of you, for those kickoff comments. While people are putting their name tags up, or do we have folks online as well? Yes. Yep, and as they join, our other members join, please use your hand function for if you're online. While we're doing all of that, let me start by asking a couple of quick questions. Edwin, can you just say a little bit about why you chose the business model? Is your business model, is your revenue source cities, or are they a channel for you and your revenue is still coming from the consumers?
Yeah, it's a great question. So our business model, we sell fully managed transportation services to cities on a long-term contractual basis. So they'll say, hey, we need 10 vehicles in this area, make it happen, and that we sign a contract to deliver those services.
And why did you choose that business model for your AV business?
Well, I think one is because the need is really, really significant. One of the things that we do when we are driving around Ann Arbor, where our headquarters is based, is we'll play the bus game. And every time a bus drives by, we'll count how many people are on the bus. And more often than we really like, the bus is almost empty. And so that's really evidence that the bus system isn't providing the service that the riders like, or they'd use it. But this is also really frustrating to the transit planners who are trying their best to provide service. And so I think the realization for us was that a bus is not always the right unit of transportation. And being able to provide microtransit service can bring everyone ahead.
Thank you. I will ask one more quick one for Luke. I'm curious about employment in Detroit. Mm-hmm. Is it still dominated, as I would assume it was in the past, with the big auto manufacturers? Are you seeing a contribution from newer entrants in the economy as well?
I would say certainly some big contributions, especially in the financial services and fintech space. As folks may be aware, Rocket Companies is based here. They are, I think, the largest employer in the city now, followed, I think, actually by the healthcare sector. So while the manufacturing workforce is a huge component, it is not necessarily the dominant component of the mix of employment opportunities and sectors in Detroit. However, it has been a huge point of focus for us. So, for instance, in the last 10 years under Mayor Duggan's leadership, we have both secured, I want to say something on the order of 9,000 new positions, net new positions in the assembly and production workforce through assembly investments and parts supplier investments that follow on to one major assembly investment in particular. So industrial production and assembly has been a huge part of our growth strategy, given the limitations of the healthcare sector, for instance, and our opportunity through site selection and new investments to unlock new jobs. But it is one of several sectors where we have our sort of non-college educated workforce employed at scale.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you. Okay, let's start with Inez, please.
Thank you very much. I'm excited with all the new development. My question is about the design process. Do you think about how to recycle the parts? Now that I want a new car, what happens to the old car? Are the parts recyclable?
Right, so there's a huge initiative on sustainability. And so you could read our whole sustainability report, but it goes from where do you get the materials, how do you use them to manufacture, and then what comes next. So like an example, a lot of the batteries that we're from the Chevy Volt and from the Bolt, we're actually using those at our proving grounds to power different things. So it's a huge piece of the decision process. And so you want to design so that you could separate those materials and reuse them. And it just, as you use more and more critical materials, so whether it be for battery technology or for the displays, some of the display technology, you need to figure out how to recycle those so that you could reuse them. Absolutely. You can't just dump those materials in a landfill.
Can I ask a follow-up? What percentage of a car is recycled today by volume or value or any other measure?
So I think our target for sustainable materials, I think 2030, we've said we're going to have 50% of sustainable materials that are used inside of it. I don't know the exact percentage. The vast majority of the metals are recycled, right? The piece of technology that's not is what's called fluff. It's some of the composite materials that get shredded, and then the question is, what do you do with those? And so if you're looking for opportunities, I know that's one that U.S. Car is looking at, and some of the Department of Energy labs, looking for ways to recycle that material or reuse it. I think that's a huge, research opportunity.
Great, thank you. Steve.
So I'm interested in your view of the most rate-limiting factors that impede progress to the penetration of autonomous vehicles all the way into consumer markets. And my prejudice is that, looking at Waymo, that it was getting enough data and getting enough experience with enough edge cases that they finally felt confident to deploy. Is that the case with you people, or is it like sensor platforms or something else that would come in? And is there a gap between those that started early and the big that started earlier at scale and what the big three now has? And what could the federal government do to accelerate progress?
So I think there are still some barriers, but I think maybe the contrarian viewpoint that I have is that they're not mostly technical anymore. Multiple AV companies have shown that you can build the cars, they can operate safely. I think many of the challenges that remain today are really economic challenges. So maybe in two categories, there would be this challenge of the scaling. So you have a technology that works in city A, how much is it going to cost you to go to city B? This is one where I think some AV companies are at a disadvantage who maybe invested in older technology that makes less use of learning, that's going to be a bigger lift for them to do. Whereas a lot of companies now are looking at ways of reducing the training cost. The other big barrier is just when you've got the vehicles in the field, how much does it cost per hour to operate a vehicle? And what you see as a rider is an empty car driving around, but what you don't see is all of the operations staff, the remote monitoring, all of the engineers who are managing the data that's being collected and curating it. And that can really increase the cost of the vehicle. And so I think the reality is that most AV companies today, every time they give a ride, they're losing money, even though they are autonomous, because of all of the hidden costs behind that. The part of the reason that we've approached working with cities on buses is because the cost of a bus is so high, typically costs about $150 an hour to operate a full-size city bus, that we can come in below that cost and provide a net cost reduction to the city, even with the additional costs that come with an AV. And so I think that the scaling challenge, to come back to your original question, will be how fast can that cost curve come down to open up new market segments, including broader expansion into paratransit or microtransit or B2C sectors. And the key driver of cost is scale. So now there's a chicken and egg problem that as soon as we can get thousands of vehicles out in the road, that's what's going to drive the cost down.
Thank you. Jen.
Hi, this is really great. Question probably mostly for Paul, but Edwin, I'd love to hear your view on this too. Can you say more about how much, if any, it sounds like you had some, Paul, which is why it's for you, engagement you have with social behavioral scientists? I mean, the people who are, who might be able to help you think through what might consumers want, how people are experiencing being in either a set of cars, or even the technology that you are developing, Paul, that's meant to be make cars and driving this experience better and certainly safer. To what extent are you in any of your research efforts including people who study this kind of thing, right? The human behavior side, I guess, where is that for each of you?
Well, so I think there's multiple levels to that. So there's the studying human behavior piece, and we have people that do that. And we're also, so the simulator that I showed, we bring in people from the outside and evaluate them and how they perform. You get a biased view if you just bring in engineers and go look at some of these things. So you've got to make sure you've got a wide population. We also, like from the accessibility perspective, we have employee resource groups that we leverage. And so to try and get them, whether it could be visually impaired or others, how do they experience things? So there's a number of different tools that we use to do exactly what you're talking about. Understand the customer, how they interact with what we're trying to provide, and kind of design the best solution for them.
I'll add briefly, I think the biggest mistake you could make going into this business is assuming that I understand what the needs are of some of these communities that have special needs. And so we spend a lot of time working with advocacy groups to make sure that we're actually solving the problems that they have and not merely thinking that we're doing the right thing. We actually want to do the right thing.
Thank you, John Banovitz.
Great discussion. Trying to pull some of those things that we talked about before, earlier today, around safety in different parts and fatalities and things like that. Can each of you talk a little bit about what it would take, or the challenges or opportunities, whether that's vehicle, infrastructure, vehicle, the ecosystem that has to be built within a city? Luke, what that would mean from the city of Detroit or the what would that actually, the challenges and opportunities to actually do that? Paul, you mentioned a little bit about partnerships. Can you go a little deeper on that, about what it would take?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm super excited about where this kind of ecosystem of connectivity could be and what it could do. So, you could have the best sensors on a vehicle, but you might not be able to see down the street because it's obstructed. If I have all of that in place, now I could see, communicate, and do some pretty amazing things. But in order for that to happen, I've got to have it be ubiquitous, right? I can't provide somebody an experience going into Detroit and then I'm driving into Toledo and it doesn't work because they didn't pay for the sensors, right? So you need alignment across the country on what those sensors are, what the communication protocols are, and make those sensors as inexpensive as possible so that cities can put them everywhere. So that's a huge piece of it. So you've got to get that alignment, that technology development, and then there's a piece around the security of it. I mean, because there's always nefarious actors out there. You have to trust, for one, that it's working, right? If I'm going to rely on a signal to my vehicle, it's got to be there and it's got to work, and it can't be, infiltrated by something else giving a wrong signal. So, alignment, driving the cost down of the sensors, getting them ubiquitous so that there's kind of a strategy across municipalities, and then making sure that they're secure. Those, to me, I think, are the four biggest things that come out.
Just to piggyback on that, and perhaps constraining the view to the earlier stages of the development process, I'll give an example of a partnership that I think is proving successful, but nevertheless is limited in its geographic scope, and so underscores, I think, some of the same points that Paul just raised. So in and around here at Michigan Central, we've created what we call a Transportation Innovation Zone, which is actually a regulatory layer about 2 square miles in size that, from the public regulatory standpoint, simplifies the approvals process. Instead of sending any innovative technology, testing or pilot activity to knock on various doors and go to various hostile windows at city departments trying to figure out whether they're in the light, we've created a one-stop process where there is a designated single point of authority to run a consolidated review and approval process that can move at the desired and necessary speed for that testing and piloting activity to go out into the real-world environment. In that same zone, we're layering physical enabling infrastructure. So to the point of smart sort of connected infrastructure and light poles that are capable to receive sensors, And then both here on 14th Street, perhaps it's already come up, the inductive charging coil that's there, and then the Envision mile of inductive charging coil in street that will go into the Michigan Avenue project in the next few years here. The vision behind the TIZ is to create a regulatory and a physical infrastructure environment that can support testing and piloting activities. But I'll tell you that it is, from a capital standpoint, from a unity of purpose and partnership standpoint, it's a lot of work. And I think trying to scale that beyond those types of concentrated bounds is a real challenge for the future of this kind of transportation and mobility technology.
I also think about infrastructure as two different categories of things. So there's safety-related infrastructure, and then there's efficiency-related infrastructure. And as far as safety-related functions go, I'm actually very bearish on it. I think that the challenges of building a secure network that can't be spoofed, that can't be jammed, that is robust not only to nefarious actors, but also someone who doesn't realize that the little fender bender they had rotated their radar 20 degrees off axis. Those are very, very difficult problems to solve. And so I think the prevailing philosophy in the AV industry, including at May, is that a car needs to be self-responsible for its own safety. It's not adequate to rely on external data sources, which may be wrong, in order to guarantee the safety of the passengers. And then given the cost of that kind of infrastructure, it's hard to see how the return on investment comes out if you can't really trust the data very much. In contrast, efficiency-related infrastructure can be a huge boon. So if you can communicate ahead to a traffic light and say, hey, it'd be peachy if in 20 seconds that traffic light was green. Now for a car, that's convenient. For a Class 8 truck, you can reduce the amount of emissions dramatically by reducing a deceleration and acceleration cycle. So I think that kind of convenience and optimization is a huge opportunity. And the benefit of this is that this is one that can be layered on over time, enabling efficiency, but never blocking the deployment of the technology in the first place.
Thank you for that discussion and that distinction. I think that was useful. Let's turn to Phil.
Hi, just building on some of the points you made on security. I mean, I don't know what GM's position is, but I know a lot of manufacturers have often been pretty hostile to independent security researchers testing the platforms. Do you plan to, and the same, this question for Edwin as well, do you open up your technology to let independent researchers basically try and hack it to prove that it's as secure as you claim? And is there any community collaboration amongst the auto manufacturers, the device manufacturers, companies like yours, Edwin, to have a kind of an open set of sharing on vulnerabilities and permit researchers to go at your technology to make it stronger and more secure?
Yeah, briefly, I think we go through a compliance process with external auditors to verify the design of our system, SOX compliance. And so that's one of the important ways that we make sure that we haven't done something that overlooked something important.
I guess to answer your specific question, I'm not aware of us going out and saying, hey, come hack our systems, but it's an interesting concept. And I know some of our cybersecurity researchers do participate in some of those events across the country to look at those challenges and learn a lot from those.
And actually, just one little follow-up, on any of that technology, and the broader technology in general, and this may apply to some of the work in the mayor's office, is how do you look at making that technology cross-pollinate into other areas? Like, Paul, I imagine everything you're doing has some strong value in industrial control systems, in kind of robotics in general, in manufacturing. Is there a lot of crossover, or do you mainly just kind of focus on the automotive piece?
So from our perspective, one of the nice things that you have being at R&D is we have labs focused on all those different areas. So we're essentially a microcosm of the larger company in one facility. So our people working on autonomy can collaborate with manufacturing, cybersecurity can collaborate with manufacturing, and that's often the avenue to do some of those things.
Thank you. Let's go on screen to Bill Daly, please.
Yeah, so thanks for three really great presentations. I've got a pair of questions that are mostly for Edwin. If micromobility is really the answer to replace large buses with minivans, I guess my first question is, why autonomy? It would seem like you could do that very quickly by just putting minivans with drivers in. Is it an economic argument that you're displacing a driver job and it's cheaper to have the autonomous vehicle than hiring people to do the same thing? And then the second part of the question is, what are the barriers to going into a new city? Once you've identified the need, that need probably exists nationwide. And this goes a little bit to Steve's earlier question about what's limiting the rollout. You can operate safely, in Ann Arbor. Why not operate safely in, Cleveland and Toledo and a whole bunch of other places around the country?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the challenges that face many micromobility companies is that rely on human drivers is that there just aren't enough drivers. So we know this even from 40-foot bus operators that I think the stat I showed earlier, that 3/4 of transit agencies in the US have had to reduce their service because there just aren't enough drivers. If you are replacing one bus with potentially 2 or 3 minivans, you've just made the potential driver shortage problem that much worse. And so the reality is that providing enough drivers to provide a level of service that's so good that you're going to convince personal car owners to take your public transit instead, autonomy is really the only practical path forward. And then new cities. Some of the challenges that we face with new cities is that every city's got a new challenge. It's when I lived in Boston, we used to joke that you don't use your turn signals because you don't want to give away your strategy. So every city has got some quirky behavior, and we need to collect data. We need to make sure we understand that. But this is now rapidly moving into the kind of place where we've wash, rinse, repeat. We've understood how to collect this data, how to validate it, and how to roll out the system. So I think we're on track there. And then there's sort of the mundane aspects of we need to generate maps. But even over time, the quality of the maps that we need, the amount of effort that goes into them is dropping very, very rapidly. So I don't see that as a major barrier for very long.
Great, thank you. Kathy.
Thank you. Let me add my appreciation for your talks. I have a pair of questions, Edwin. I think you partially answered what I was curious about, but maybe you could say a little bit more about your market prospecting for potential new cities. What kinds of data, what sort of preparation you do to identify a city that's maybe promising, right scale, right kinds of needs, anything along those lines. And maybe for any of you, Paul, this might be most particularly in your lane. You talked about getting some common understanding of sensor needs, sensor density, standards, and so forth. Is there yet an effective standards forum trying to pull that together across all the different players?
Great. So when we're looking for potential markets to expand into, we're looking for a handful of things. First of all, do the economics work out? Is there enough value created to support the operation of autonomous vehicles today at a price that is comparable to the cost that they're paying today? Or are we going to have to wait until the costs are more competitive?
So that's kind of an economic analysis of their current mass transit system?
Absolutely, yes. So looking at what their spend is and whether they identify it as, hey, this is not efficient, we need help. Or if they've got a bus and you're filling the bus, keep the bus. That's great. It's incredibly efficient. The other thing that we do is we have a very, one of the ways that we try to reduce the cost of the service so that we can reach more customers is that we're ruthlessly designing our vehicles for the kinds of environments that our typical customers operate in. So what I mean by that is think of all the places that a traditional municipal bus might go. We're designing for those environments. Most municipal buses do not go on the freeway. And going on the freeway requires much more expensive sensors to give you the range to be able to detect that oncoming car. If you know that you're only going to operate at speeds 40 miles an hour and less, you can shave a lot of money off of the cost of the vehicle and then be able to start working with cities earlier on. But the consequence of that is that if there's a customer that absolutely requires freeway operation on day one, then the conversation is more about, how about next year?
And to address your other question about, so there's two aspects of it. We do a lot of consortia work, and that's where getting alignment on those desires starts, and then you work with SAE, IEEE, others to ultimately come up with the standard piece of that.
NHTSA is not yet involved in the standards?
The what?
NHTSA is not yet, Or is NHTSA, National Highway Transport Safety?
So I mean, they're involved in safety standards and other things. What I was referring to, like protocols, communication
Yeah,
protocols and things like that.
I was curious.
Yeah.
They're just staying
Yeah.
on the safety side so
Right.
far. Okay.
Great, next we have Vicky.
Thanks, Arthur. Thank you for these great talks. And I think you've talked about, as I was thinking about the three avenues of innovation here. There's the pure.
Hey, Vicky, just get right up into the mic because it's sort of hard to hear in
All
here.
right, sorry. Is this better?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
All right. So you've talked to us about three different, what I think of as phases of innovation. The pure innovation, Paul, the integrated solutions, and then what we have to do to make the innovations accessible in a meaningful way. How would you describe American competitiveness across these sectors? I mean, I can sit here and go, whoa, this has to be the coolest stuff, on the planet. But where are other countries with regard to the raw innovation, the integrated solutions, and the openness of communities to embrace and implement this?
Shall we go in process order, raw innovation?
Yeah, so early on, I mean, I think the U.S. is still leading, but, I
Leading in the innovation piece, leading.
in the research piece, the early piece of it. But I want to put the caveat, I just saw a recent article on the number of publications out of China, and that's been increasing and increasing and increasing in terms of, refereed journals. So that's been, I think, a big threat and change. The network of national labs and universities is still very powerful in that perspective. So I think there's opportunity to grow there, but I still see a lot of U.S. power there. I mean, there's still a lot of people come to U.S. for graduate work, a lot of great work going on at the universities. I think there's probably more opportunity in some of the next phases where we need to emphasize.
I think that, to state the obvious, the U.S. does not have a monopoly on smart people, right? But we do have a culture that is very good at innovation and R&D. And I think that it's something we can double down on in terms of supporting grad students and supporting the academic enterprise, something I feel very strongly about as a professor of the University of Michigan. I think one of the challenges that we face is that once there's traction in a market, oftentimes competitors in the Chinese market are so well capitalized, oftentimes with government support and coordination, that it makes for a very uneven playing field. And so that's something we need to be thinking very carefully about. How do we protect US companies that are innovating, doing really great things, from just being outspent?
Yeah, and I just want to add to that before we jump. I'm talking about the infrastructure of the universities, the labs. We need to get kids going into science. I mean, that I would say is a U.S. problem, right? You can go to graduate schools in every place. To get the domestic kids want to go to grad school and make that life choice, that's a problem, right? And let's not even talk about getting more women to go to school, African Americans, Latinos. That's a problem. So how to get more people underrepresented excited about science and technology and going to grad school, that's a U.S. problem that needs to get addressed.
I think on the implementation and integration of technology into, say, production, for instance, obviously that's been happening for a long time, and I think gradually, I mean, we're doing it well, and I think people have sort of made peace with it despite the anxiety about further automation and in the production process. I think in order to sort of exercise those fears, the path forward is to be able to do things we couldn't do before because we're introducing technology into the assembly process and growing the pie and preserving and expanding opportunity through, I think, advanced manufacturing and the application of technology into hard technology, or the sort of expansion of hard technology prowess in Detroit or any other sort of traditional industrial urban economy. In order to do that, I think, and where we, I think, experience the biggest bottleneck is really on government processes, the ability to actually deploy the produced products into the field through either the enabling infrastructure constraints that we described before and the difficulties with capitalizing and deploying those technologies, but more to the point, just building things. I think so much of what we do in the mayor's office is making sure that the local government doesn't impede our ability to make things happen and doing whatever we can to facilitate them. And I do think that when it comes to, say, in the construction technology sector, which I think would benefit greatly from more and more sort of industrialized processes, the ability to update building codes, the ability to do land use and zoning processes that are ready for that kind of technology and scale development, and then the sort of building permitting and field inspection process. It's really sort of granular regulatory stuff, but it actually really gets in the way, I think, of our ability to solve problems and really make it possible for these technologies to actually deliver the value proposition and the return on investment that we're asking to make now. So I think that's where we have the biggest challenge.
Thank you. Let's turn to Steve.
So I want to return to the security issue that Phil raised. And if you fast forward to a country in which we've got really widespread deployment of autonomous vehicles that are interacting with the environment and that are interacting with each other, that system relies on each vehicle receiving lots and lots of complex electromagnetic radiation, from LiDAR signals to radio waves and that sort of thing. And so it seems to me that it would be uniquely vulnerable if the chips inside it had malware with shutoff switches in it, right? Cripple the nation's infrastructure. And so the question is there a move to source the materials in this industry from trusted manufacturers, or is there another way to guard against that vulnerability? We've talked a lot about this kind of issue with the power sector and the water system in the U.S., and it seems to me maybe we're setting ourselves up for another one.
Yeah, I think that's a great concern, and I don't think there's any easy answers here. In fact, I might even add that it's not just the chips, it's also the training data. And by maliciously manipulating training data, can you get the system to learn the wrong thing? Sort of a thought experiment that if bad actors got into an F-35's target detection thing, could you train it to ignore enemy jets that are painted pink? Which you wouldn't know until the pink fighter actually showed up in front of you, and then the system's like, what jet? So data custody, and being really careful about that is a huge issue. And given the incredible data appetites that these systems have, that makes custody and security of the underlying data a really big challenge.
I'll add that the two vulnerabilities you each identified, chips and training data, are real, but an adversary doesn't actually have to work as hard as either of those to cause all kinds of havoc. Let's turn to Dennis behind the pillar for me.
Okay, thank you so much, Artie. Yeah. So when we look at how to best meet our needs for personal transportation, there's probably a continuum of solutions from, let's say, the most convenient and flexible, but perhaps most expensive, to perhaps others that might make more sense, but there are trade-offs. So I'm just wondering, along that continuum and with the autonomous solution in mind, everything else, how do you feel the notorious sort of last mile problem can play a role to it? Like, for example, can we still leverage the bus or the autonomous monorail or something else, and then develop solutions, robotic and others, for the last mile?
Yeah, absolutely. So our North Star is to outcompete personal car ownership. So we think that ultimately people driving individual cars and parking is the problem to solve. Now, how we do that is going to depend on the specific problem we see in a specific environment. If you're in suburbia, then having on-demand point-to-point service, essentially door-to-door, is a great solution because congestion may not be the #1 problem you have. You may be optimizing for access. But if you're talking about last mile within a congested downtown core, filling that downtown core with a bunch of autonomous vehicles is no solution. So what we need to do is we need to think about the entire trip and how to optimize every segment of that trip to be better than driving yourself in. I'll give you an example. One that I find really exciting is that imagine that you live in the suburbs and you're commuting downtown. Well, how do you make that whole trip really, really efficient? It can't be to take an autonomous car all the way from the suburbs downtown, because now you're just replacing personally owned cars with autonomous cars that are adding to congestion. So what you need to do is you need to funnel them in the first mile to a mass transit link, and then get that mass transit link to get them to downtown. And maybe you've got some last mile solution downtown as well. But this actually opens up a lot of opportunities. If you think about light rail or subway systems today they have very small basins of attraction. Like the set of people who will use a given transit stop is very small. But if you had a really, really convenient set of autonomous first mile vehicles, you could expand that basin of attraction much larger. Now that means that you could get by with fewer stops on the light rail or subway line, and that means that the trip on the subway could be much faster because you're not stopping every 400 yards for the next stop. So I think that by holistically viewing this in terms of the funnels to attract people, to draw them into public transit, and then optimizing the mass transit links, we could actually create a suburbia to downtown link that is less time than it would have taken for you to drive in yourself. But it requires a lot of work. But that's the goal. That's what we want to do.
Bill?
So I was struck reading the other day that 70% of Costco's profit comes from their membership fees. And I wonder if, in addition to your selling to city model, there's some kind of, I would call it freemium, but I don't mean a model where, trying to attract the more affluent, someone like me who's not all that affluent, but I would pay $100 a month for the ability to have a very convenient service as backup to my privately owned vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
And I might do that for a number of years before I decide that I don't need the privately owned vehicle. So I wonder if there's some model like that to get income essentially for free in a certain sense, the way Costco does with membership fees.
A number of AV companies have looked at that sort of subscription model. It's not one that we've gone down the path of, but one of the things I agree strongly with is that there can be market segmentation in order to attract different consumers. So, you, for example, may be deciding between driving I don't know what you drive, but, a fairly nice, comfortable car. All right, yeah, Subarus are good. And you can be in there, you can sing to the music or whatever, like it's your space. And that is what public transit solution needs to compete with. You traveling at your own time, in your own comfortable bubble. And that's a high bar. So in order to convert current car users to public transit users, that's what we have to compete with. It has to be better than that. And that might mean creating new kinds of vehicles that are more like business class seating in them. So you can get in, you've got personal space, you're not crammed in with 14 other people, you can work on your laptop, you can zone out. We need to create those kinds of experiences.
Okay, great. Maria?
Thanks. This is for Luke. So I'm just wondering how the City of Detroit is thinking about permitting in some of these innovations. So you like to be the center of discovery and innovation, but you'd also like to test things out. But of course, there are reasons that you wouldn't want to test some things out at certain parts of their development. So so obviously, the city must be thinking about this. And what are the views?
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. Returning to the TIZ is probably the best example, not least because it's really the testbed where we're trying to refine the best approach here and either expand it geographically or apply it to other sort of verticals. But on the one hand, there is the need to create a simplified and reliable, from at least not an outcome, but a timing standpoint process, so that if somebody were either here and wanted to take advantage of a real-world testing environment, or they were interested in running a test or a pilot here, and that's part of a potential attraction opportunity for us, we want to give them the certainty of a process timeline that we couldn't give under the old system. And that, I think, for purposes of meeting innovators where they are, is a really important ingredient, and not something I think government does often enough. But the other ingredient is, given that this is a tool that can deliver solutions for stakeholders in the geography, be they residents, be they small businesses, keeping it geographically sort of tight enough gives us the opportunity to do that engagement and try to make connections between those potential use cases and the pilots, and make living in the TIZ a benefit instead of it being viewed as almost you're in a testing environment instead of a piece of the city that has an additional layer of government services capacity that can bring solutions to your life. So we do that through, I think, very careful engagement more generally, and then on a sort of pilot-specific basis. So those, I think, are the big lessons learned. The trouble is that is really painstaking work, and as always, the sort of human bandwidth requirements of government processes tend to be the biggest bottleneck of all. And so, in order to, I think, reach a stage where we're delivering those solutions for more people and the use cases multiply, so that this that type of platform is more useful to everyone involved. We're starting where we are, and we're looking to we either, I think, are seeking other options to more people.
Thank you both. Laura.
All right, I don't usually get to ask questions during these sessions, so this is a big deal for me. I was going to especially ask Luke, but really all of you, given that transportation infrastructure is essentially entirely locally owned, the bridges and the roads and the personal vehicles, those are not federal resources. Nevertheless, this group would probably like to know the ways in which the federal government could help promote greater innovation in the transportation sector. So what are your thoughts about what ideas, resources, promotion of consortia, I don't even know, might be valuable?
You want to go?
Yeah, I'll jump in. So most transit agencies today do not come anywhere close to recovering their full cost of operations from fares. It might be as low as like 20% or so. So in fact, a lot of the funding for transit programs is coming from the federal government already. And I see the biggest opportunity is to think about how to structure these grants to allow cities to start deploying AVs where they make sense. So I think the mechanisms are there, but oftentimes the mechanisms today are really oriented around CapEx, buying fleets of buses. But I don't think cities actually want to buy fleets of AVs that are locked to a particular AV vendor. So what we should probably be looking at are different funding structures that allow cities to shift some of those grants into OpEx.
So I would say one of the opportunities is to make sure there's oversight's not the right word, but opportunity to get things aligned. So there's been a tremendous amount of funding from the Department of Transportation, and we've seen, we've got projects here in Ann Arbor, we've got ones in Utah, ones in Texas, all looking at different aspects of traffic light, traffic flow, other things like that. We need to make sure that it's not a project here, project here, project here, but when you have this large amount of money to go after things, that it's well coordinated. So I think that's a huge role that the government can play beyond the funding, is to help make sure it's not everybody's got their onesie solutions, and that it's well coordinated.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And what I would add is, as grateful as we are for the investments that have come to Detroit from the federal government the last few years, you rightly point out that the road network is really a local responsibility. And if you think about the structural elements of Detroit's financial distress leading to bankruptcy and the long-term liabilities that we have to manage as a legacy city, the street network of a city built for 2 million people when we are a city of, less than that. There's a little dispute about how many people live here between us and the Census Bureau. I don't want to air out dirty laundry, but nevertheless, substantially less than that. So how do you, with a tax base of a population that has, we all agree, at least been reduced by more than half, and the resource base that's available to maintain that street network is a challenge every day. Ask Detroiters who live in any number of neighborhood streets that ideally would have been resurfaced and intended to long ago, and tell them that the city's going to spend its money on 21st century transportation infrastructure somewhere else instead of doing the 20th century infrastructure that they need to live in the highest possible quality of life. So federal investments that acknowledge that legacy cities in particular, because of those financial challenges, need additional support in order to bring the whole street network forward, I think would be particularly beneficial.
Thank you. Terry Tao.
Yes, this is a question for Edwin. I'm wondering how you plan to have your autonomous vehicles deal with really rare events that are outside of your training data. So I'm reminded there was some incidents I'm from Los Angeles. There was some incidents a few years ago where there were some wildfires in California, and Waze saw all the roads that were closed, that the traffic had dropped to zero, and they started directing all the cars into the fire zones. I think Waze has fixed that particular problem, but
Not ideal.
But that's the type of scenario. Like, are there ways to sort of guard against that kind of problem?
Yeah, and this is a hard problem because there are lots of crazy things that can happen. One approach that we think is very promising is, or let me back up. I think the central challenge is that the combinatorics of the number of environments, the things that a vehicle might find itself encountering, it's ridiculous. And there's really no rational reason to think that we can collect training data that's going to cover the ridiculous number of things that a vehicle might encounter. So there's going to be gaps in the training data we collect ahead of time. So I think one of the big challenges is vehicle is operating, it's on the road, and there's something crazy going on. What tools can we give the vehicle to figure that out in situ for the first time? And one of the tools that we think is really exciting here is essentially Monte Carlo tree search, where you can play out dynamically, hey, this is what I see in the world right now. What are the 1,000 things, most likely things that I think might come out of this over the course of the next 10 seconds? And even if that wasn't in the training data, running those simulations can give you traction, some leverage on that unseen case. And so that's one of the approaches we're really excited about, and you can do online reinforcement learning based on those Monte Carlo tree search samples to improve your driving policy, even for situations that are outside your training data. It doesn't solve all problems, like a wildfire, that's a really tricky one, but I think it can help.
I want to follow on to that with a question that's been on my mind, and I think it's really for both Edwin and Luke. Edwin, early on you said AVs have proven to be safe, and then you talked about how it was really an economics issue. I want to unpack that statement. How do you define safe? How is it measured, company by company and across the industry? And then, Luke, on your side, when you're assessing any transportation solution, what's safe enough, and how do you assess as from the city side? And the concern that's in my mind is one I've had about AVs for a long time, which is that I think it's actually quite easy to imagine that AVs will be safer than human drivers in many circumstances, because that's sadly a low bar. But the kinds of mistakes that they make are very attention-grabbing, very concerning. They often don't look like mistakes that humans would ever make. And so accepting as we've just been talking about, the corner cases are the things that still confuse an AV. How we come to accept and judge those is part of what I'm trying to understand, but it'd be helpful to understand in a more quantitative way where we are in terms of proving safety and what matters to you.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I would suggest a lagging indicator here, like how many people are being hurt, how many people are being killed. The challenge, of course, that's the number we actually care about. The challenge is that the rate at which these events occur is so low that it requires so much time and effort to log those miles that by the time you've got a statistically relevant number of samples, your software has been changed 300 times. So that leads you down a path of looking at safety through the lens of how well is it performing in simulation, where we can increase the denominator on these trials, basically increase the statistical significance. We look a lot at those kinds of situations. We also think about, we call them canary events that are close to a bad outcome, but that are not actually bad. And we use those as a proxy to sort of amplify the quality, the meaningfulness of the data that we have. You're exactly right that I think AVs are going to have different failure modes than human drivers. They're built very differently. A human would never drive into a wildfire, but if a AV was commanded to do that, it may not know. So it's going to have very different failure modes. But I think the data that we have so far is that AVs radically outperform human drivers, and that's including in these.
What data is that? That's actually what I'm trying to get an understanding of.
Yeah, so a lot of AV companies have published their own stats. Waymo, I don't remember the exact number, but they published some stats showing that they're substantially safer than human accident rate. For May, for example, in autonomy mode, we've had one accident at fault, and it was we clipped a mirror of a parked car that had an extended mirror, like, you know, when you have a trailer. Obviously not a great thing, but that's in 350,000 rides. So that level of safety is really, really good. I think any transit agency.
Can you benchmark that compared to human driving for that distance in those kinds of circumstances? Like how many accidents might you expect for a human-driven vehicle?
Yes, so the overall safety stats are in the neighborhood of around 100 million miles per fatality. And then boiling that down for how many miles are driven per injury, per collision, that gets really hard to do because not all of them are reported systematically. So you have to kind of estimate a little bit. But I think even based on sort of the best measures that we have, that one fender bender kind of collision at fault is every 350,000 miles, or 350,000 trips rather, is vastly better than typical human performance. And most transit agencies would be very excited if their buses had incidents at that rate.
And I've seen companies report, and you mentioned, is there any organization or agency that aggregates and tries to do an apples to apples?
Yeah, absolutely. So these are our required reporting requirements to NHTSA. So in fact, all of our data is reported by us and our AV peers.
Great, that's helpful. And Luke, I'd love to hear from your side.
Yeah, so when it comes to personal vehicles, the city is not really in the middle of the regulatory safety decision-making as much as it is with robotics and last-mile delivery technologies that are tested and piloted in the city. And so in that case, I wish I could say that we had a 350,000 ride denominator that I could refer to and offer really sophisticated sort of quantitative feedback, but in reality, it's a case-by-case process. And enough of these technologies are early stage enough that they still have a human monitor, and that's obviously a big source of comfort. And generally speaking, the biggest fight we have is whether they use the bike lane. So.
Okay, gotcha. That's a big one. Okay, so I think we've got Bill, and then Laura, and then Maria. Great, Laura, why don't you go ahead?
Two short questions. One is building on three questions from Jen, Terry, and Arthi, is that the mistakes that AVs have made are really scary. So I have auto drive, and a lot of my friends have auto drive. I stopped using it when I was driving along, and a truck in front of me, the ladder fell off, and I avoided it. I don't think the car would have missed it. So I'm probably putting myself more in danger when I'm tired, and I tend not to use my auto drive. So that's one question, is how do you address those kind of outside of what they're training and the social and behavior, when I know I'm safer to use it all the time, except for these fluke things. Then the next thing is that, are you going to scale this to other cities like Ashtabula, Ohio, Gainesville, Florida, and maybe so I know a lot of people that won't use certain vehicles because they want to take long trips. Do you foresee this in the future, being able to do trips that would be cross-country or cross-state using these kind of vehicles?
Mm-hmm. So one distinction I would make is the kinds of self-driving that most consumers experience today, whether it's something in your car, that would be an ADAS level system. And I would agree, those make scary mistakes, like just randomly taking an exit or driving into something they shouldn't. The kinds of systems that we're building are a very, very different beast. And that's enabled by a very different economic model. So part of the challenge is that if you're building an ADAS system, a driver assistance feature that's going to go in millions of cars, your budget is maybe $5,000. And that's going to greatly reduce the kinds of sensors that you can provide. And with that comes significantly reduced performance. There's just limitations to what you can do with $5,000 worth of hardware. The kinds of systems that we're talking about, these are level 4 systems, like Waymos, Cruises, May Mobilities, where we're spending substantially more on sensors that have a much better ability to understand what's going on and have more data available to them ahead of time to help them make correct decisions. So the kinds of failures that you'd get in an L4 system are very, very different. I encourage you to try them. They feel great. So it's a very, very different experience. And happy to do a follow-up if you have one. On scaling long trips, absolutely. The time will come where you'll be able to get into an autonomous car and be able to say, take me to Cape Canaveral, because I want to go see a rocket launch. That's a hobby of mine. But we're not there yet. So part of the way that we're building technology, maybe this is responsive to the first part, is that there's a huge amount of validation that goes on a block-by-block, kilometer-by-kilometer basis. So unlike an ADAS system where you've got a super cruise kind of system, you want that available on any bit of freeway that you happen to be on. There's only so much validation they can do for every kilometer. But when we operate, every single kilometer is mapped, reviewed by engineers, validated in simulation, validated by test drivers to make sure that we have that level of performance where we are very, very confident about safety. And doing that all the way from here to Cape Canaveral, we're not at that point yet. That would be prohibitive today.
So just a couple comments to add. You should drive Super Cruise, because I did do that to Florida. It was awesome. Not fully automated. But I think part of what we want to do here is also say, what are the problems? And I heard that question come up a couple times. You mentioned sensors and cost. You're looking at funding and research opportunities. Driving out the cost of those sensors and devices is huge. I mean, all the CHIPS Act funding is on the table. I think there's a huge opportunity there, but then also the onboard compute. How to do that more efficiently, and also how to make the decision of what compute I do onboard versus what compute I do offboard. There's an opportunity as well to try and be efficient with that. So a lot of wonderful research problems and opportunities to improve the systems there.
Let's go to Bill.
So when we teach our students statistics, we sometimes explain to them that the maximum likelihood solution may not be very likely. And we especially teach this when we teach them about Bayesian statistics, where there's a large range of outcomes that need to be integrated over. Whereas most machine learning algorithms are really, in a sense, looking for the most probable solution or the maximum likelihood solution or something like that. So you triggered this question with your discussion of your tree search. But it's also this question of if the car meets an unexpected environment, then, loosely, there may be some Bayesian solution, which is the less sure I am, the safer I have to be, and the more conservative I have to be, whereas the maximum likelihood solution might be wrong, and it might be, wow, I should speed up and get out of here as fast as I can. So there are some fundamental machine learning questions that come into play. I wonder what any of the speakers think about that.
Yeah, you're speaking my language. So, but my background, by the way, I'm a statistics nerd. So, yeah, I'm machine learning. So you're exactly right. So there are a couple catastrophically wrong things you can do, mistakes that I've made earlier in my career. One of them is to assume that you have probability distributions over what every other agent in the scene might do, and you look at the maximum likelihood thing that might happen, and you plan for that. Terrible idea, because you can almost guarantee that what actually happens is different than the maximum likelihood solution. And so if you were planning for your car to be collision-free with respect to somewhere where they are not, that's a problem. So you have to sample. You have to have something more robust than just going with maximum likelihood. The other place where we've seen a similar sort of fallacy in reasoning is looking at the expected value of a particular policy. So if you have two different driving strategies and you sample 1,000 times with each, how well does driving policy A work on average? How well does driving policy B work on average? Pick the one with the best average performance. Catastrophically bad idea, because different outcomes are not linear in any way. So what you might prefer a system, a reward function, which is deeply penalizes anything resembling an accident or a law violation. And so it's really important to think about this from a capturing the nonlinearities in the problem and not trying to just take a maximum likelihood or marginalize over all of the uncertainty.
I think we've got just exactly enough time for Maria and then Eric.
Thank you. This is for Paul. And so a company like GM, you're trying to sell cars all over the world. And if we just look at this country, you know, you've got people in drastically different situations who need drastically different kinds of vehicles. You know, I mean, we always want to improve safety, that's for sure. But, you know, in places out west, people are going to have their car and they're going to drive long distances, where in cities, there's going to be more and more shared vehicles. And I guess you've got a bet in terms of, you know, how you invest on what features are you going to work on that are more beneficial to like a shared vehicle versus, you know, a vehicle that would drive long distances, or do you kind of, to what extent do, you know, the world is changing and you have to quick react to it, so.
I mean, I think ultimately, we're trying to make vehicles for everyone's needs, whether you're out west pulling a trailer or you're in a city. And so I think the challenge of engineering going forward is how to do that as efficiently as possible, share parts, all the things that are common, do that in a very simple way. And then there's others that are going to have to be unique solutions depending on those applications, right? And then you layer software on top of that. How can I update and do that to meet the customer's needs, again, depending on what that situation is. So, I mean, it's kind of fun. And then you've got, you know, we have the Corvette team that will have a very unique solution for that market, and it's been extremely successful. So there's always, you know, you have to comprehend all of that.
Eric, why don't you wrap us up with your question?
Thank you, and sorry I can't be there today with everybody. When will it be the case that we have an NTSB-like investigation process for accidents with shared technical details and data among the companies and the public? And what's holding that back right now?
I think that's a hard question to answer. So I don't know why we don't have that process. I think that all the AV companies take safety really seriously, and there's an openness and willingness to learn together about what mistakes can be made and how we can improve them. Maybe a related aspect is you know, should autonomous cars follow something more like a plain certification model? And I think, you know, with type certifications and things like that. And I don't actually necessarily think the answer is yes for that, because these are very different kinds of vehicles with very different kinds of life cycles. You know, and a plane is professionally managed, you know, has a scheduled maintenance program, whereas, you know, autonomous vehicles and ADAS systems are going to be put in the hands of individual consumers. So you're missing the entire life cycle management, which makes it difficult to think about this in the same context that you would do a airplane type certification. So I think coming back to your question is, I think there's a willingness here to figure out what the best processes are, but I don't think that we've necessarily got the perfect solution today.
Thank you all for those discussions. This was really terrific. We did not get any outside requests for questions or comments, but I do want to take a minute and see if any of our in-person guests have a brief question or comment that they would like to contribute. You're more than welcome to join us for that if you'd like to take a second and think about that.
In addition, do any of you have questions for each other? Nope. Any of you have anything that you'd like to say? Any questions to add?
Hi, I'm Ed Cackett. I'm Associate Dean for Research at Wayne State University, just up the road. And, I'm in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, so we have students across, obviously, all different fields. As folks in innovation area, what are you looking for in terms of programs, either undergraduate, graduate programs, that are setting students up to be successful and be creative and be innovative, and keep competitiveness in the US?
So I think in addition to the traditional academic classes, the programs, it could be solar car, it could be eco car, these hands-on opportunities for students to do something, work as a team, bring multidisciplinary expertise together to solve a problem, that's huge. And then the other piece that I emphasize over and over again, communication skills. Making sure people can communicate really clearly, that's just a huge differentiator.
We love students who have a huge amount of hands-on lab kind of experience, but I think there's also a real challenge here as well. So, from teaching many labs at University of Michigan and the Robotics Institute there, we oftentimes would find students who would be attracted to projects with an excessively large scope, where they're going to build a robot and it's going to have speech recognition, it's going to do path planning, it's going to pick and fold towels, and it's going to do everything. And what this inevitably led to was students who had a very shallow understanding of each of those systems. And it was sort of the art of the mashup, the art of the demo, rather than real technical mastery. And so one of the things I look for when we're hiring engineers is not how impressive your end demo was, but how deep did you go into one component of that.
I think we just, go ahead.
And I would just add very quickly that I really want to echo Paul's points about sort of cross-team, the collaborative learning experiential opportunities. And that is not just to help the technical and scientific and engineering students learn sort of the complementary set of skills, but vice versa. And all of that, I think wrapping that in the skills development and entrepreneurship generally, I think would be very beneficial. The R&D system in Southeast Michigan is obviously world-class, but the entrepreneurship training that skilled engineers have in Southeast Michigan has a lot to gain from university programs that are designed to drive progress there.
Well, I think you three covered a huge range of requests and asks of our educators over here, so thank you all for what you do. Thanks for that good question. And I really want to thank our panel, this panel, but also our prior speakers. We've had a really terrific introduction to many, many different facets of transportation, and greatly appreciate your contributions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, let's see, just to wrap up, I want to remind people that next week, anyone who is interested can find a recording of this event along with bios and presentation materials. That'll be on the PCAST website. And with that, let me turn it to Frances for any closing remarks.
Thanks, Arti. I just want to say I learned a lot today about some very, very interesting science and technology and how it interacts with people. So thanks, everyone.
Yeah, and let me add my thanks to all the presenters. We learned a great deal. We're not transportation experts here, but we came to the center of the universe in transportation, and we were justly rewarded with knowledge. So thank you all.
Okay, I think we now can close this session. Thanks, everyone.